At an Inn by Thomas Hardy. Okay, so looking at the first stanza here, it says, when we as strangers sought, note the alliteration, their catering care, so we're assuming here that they walked into what seems to be like a pub. It says at an inn, obviously. Veiled smiles bespoke their thought of what we were. So in other words, it was assumed they were a couple. They warmed as they opined us more than friends. In other words, treated them as more than friends. That we had all resigned for love's dear ends. In other words, that we had resigned ourselves to marriage or resigned ourselves as a couple, that we were in love. So we're saying here that the pub, the people in the pub, seeing these strangers walk in, welcome them with smiles because they think they're a couple and they're in love. Okay, so that first stanza suggests to us that this couple that walked in, of which the narrator is one of the couple, isn't actually in love. Otherwise, why would they be saying this? So we move on to the second stanza. And we see here the alliterative swift sympathy, and that swift sympathy with living love. Okay, so a lot of alliteration here to emphasize, I suppose, the sense of apparent love between them, which quicks the world. So living love quicks the world. Quicks the world suggests, means, quickens the world. In other words, makes the world turn faster, makes life go faster. Time flies when you're having fun. So it suggests that this suggested love between them, this sympathy with a loving couple, makes everyone a bit happier, and it quickens the world. The spheres, maybe the spheres above, in other words, the planets of the universe, made them our ministers. Okay, so in other words, maybe there's something in the heavens, in the universe, that's suggesting that these two should be together. Move them to say, them being the people in the pub, we presume, God, that bliss like theirs would flush our day. So then the narrator quotes the comments from people in the pub, it seems, that suggest, if only we could be like that. And of course, there's an element of dramatic irony here, because it does appear that they're not in love. Otherwise, why would the narrator be saying this? So let's move on again. And we were left alone as love's own pair. So the people in the pub sort of left them alone to their own devices. Yet never the love light shone between us there. Oh, there we go. So there's the reveal to us that they're not actually together. They're not actually in love, this couple. So dramatic irony. But that which chilled the breath of afternoon and palsied unto death the pain fly's tune. Oh, let's look at that. So it wasn't love that was between them, but in fact, that which chilled the breath of afternoon. In other words, there was quite a frost between them, perhaps. And palsied unto death the pain fly's tune. Led unto death the pane fly, the window pane fly. In other words, like the fly that flies into the window pane. It's just nothing. It's nondescript. It's unnoticed. So in fact, what's between them is a frostiness, maybe. The kiss, their zeal foretold, and now deemed come, came not. Within his hold, love lingered numb. Why cast he on us port a bloom not ours? Okay, so it seems that they, the people in the pub, their zeal, they was like, they'll kiss goodbye, and now it's the time that they're saying goodbye to each other. But it didn't happen. And it says within his hold. So suddenly it seems to be third person here now. The narrator is becoming a third person, looking in on the relationship. Within his hold, love lingered numb. Notice this alliteration still going on. His hold, love lingered, numb. Okay, so there was no love, even though, he held her, it seems, for a moment to kiss her goodbye. Why cast he on our port a bloom not ours? So why cast he on our port? He, perhaps, God? Why does he cast on our relationship a bloom of love which isn't ours to behold, it seems? It's curious. It seems that they're questioning here. The he, or the narrator, is questioning, why is there a sense of love between us? Why is there something between us? Why are people assuming that we're in love? Which makes us think that within his hold could be God's voice, and then we're not transferring to third person. Okay, so his hold could be referring to God. Why cast he on our port? Okay, so moving on to the end of that stanza. Why shaped us for his sport in after hours? Once again, reference perhaps to God. It's also a reference to King Lear. Okay, we are as wanton flies to the gods, they kill us for their sport. Saying that we are at the mercy of God. Why shaped us for his sport in after hours? In other words, why does it appear that we seem to be together, but there's no reason for us to be? What's going on in terms of fate? But the last stanza changes everything. As we seemed, we were not that day afar. In other words, as we seemed, we were actually quite close together. And now we seem not what we aching are. Okay, and now, in other words, we're not together. And we are aching to be together. Oh, severing sea and land. Okay, notice the alliteration, severing sea. That gives a real sense of cutting there. Severing sea and land, oh laws of men. So this kind of asking of God, perhaps, asking of the universe. We are severed by sea, we are severed by land, we are severed by laws of men. What could that mean? That could mean perhaps the fact that she's married. The severing sea could mean that she's far across the oceans and across land. Ere death, which is before death, once let us stand as we stood then. In other words, let us be together. So it does appear that this relationship that was initially non-existent when they walked into a pub, although it appears they were together, now appears to be a relationship that they're now in love, but the irony is they're far apart, maybe through distance in land, distance over the sea, or maybe she's married, or he's married, or they're both married. But what's happened here? Has God been playing with them? Has the universe been playing with them? This fits into Hardy's view of God, and he was agnostic. In other words, he wasn't sure whether God was there or not. Well, he was a believer in God, but he wasn't sure that God was benevolent necessarily. In other words, kind. So there's a sense of him thinking that God is perhaps playing with him and his woman friend. Why is it when we were together, we weren't in love? Now we're in love, we're not together. And this whole poem seems to be a study of that strange law of the world, of the universe, that messes up this relationship